Greetings, everyone. I'm Sister Michelle, and today our guest is Sister Linda Buck, CSJ. And today her topic is conflict management and personal agency. We hope to learn a lot today. Sister Linda.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to have this opportunity to journey with you in your Life Skills for Mission program. Today, I'm speaking about conflict management and personal agency. And I'll begin this session discussing the notion of personal agency and then move into the discussion of conflict management. So personal agency, which is also referred to as self-agency, is the experience of being in control of one's actions and taking the responsibility for the consequences of those actions that we have in our life. So what I choose to do has consequences that I must live with. These consequences can be positive, neutral, or negative. When I reflect on personal agency and consecrated religious life, I think about God's deepest desire for us. And I'm going to begin sharing the screen here.
Good. Okay.
Okay. Of course, I always have technical difficulty.
I understand.
There we go.
Yes. Well, yes, we see the screen.
Okay, wonderful. And then here's the slide in its full glory. Okay.
There you go.
Now, with all the technology stuff we've been doing because of the pandemic, we're very used to these little blips. So again, when I think about personal agency, I think about God's deepest desire for us. And so what is that? God created each of us in our uniqueness and desires for each one to come to the fullness of who we are meant to be. If we don't continue to journey toward wholeness and towards fullness, those parts of ourselves that are not realized do not get expressed in the world. Another way of saying it is that aspects of God's creation go unexpressed. This is why personal agency is so important. I like to think about personal agency as the capacity for self-reflection. And in many ways, discernment, it's like discernment. And before I go into that, I want to read a quote from Henry Nouwen that I think really captures what I'm talking about. The first thing to realize is that you are the glory of God. The question is not so much how to live for the glory of God, but how to live where we are, how to make true our deepest self. You are the place where God chose to dwell. You are God's place, and the spiritual life is nothing more or less than to allow that space to exist where God can dwell. If the glory of God is not where I am, where else can I be? So he's such a profound spiritual writer.
Mm-hmm.
And so given that, when I think about personal agency, I think about it as the capacity for self-reflection. And in many ways, it's like discernment, discerning what God desires for us in the world. This provides a balance for the inward and outward focus. And in my view, this balance is why personal agency is so important. Personal agency can be labeled as individualistic. Even the name has a hint of self-involvement. Yet, if we think about it as similar to discernment, it opens the process beyond self to God and toward understanding that our actions and decisions also have consequences for others. This helps address the idea that personal agency is a social construct seen in individualistic cultures and is not something considered aligned with collective cultures. My hope is that we can really understand this idea of personal agency and see its fruit for each of us as we live consecrated religious life in community. Again, personal agency is defined as being in control of our actions and the consequences they have in our lives. Think about it. Even in the most collective cultures, each person makes choices every day. There is a sense of ownership in one's life, knowing that whatever comes our way, we will not fall apart or be so consumed by the other or by others that we lose our identity. Agency is like our skin that holds our body together. Agency holds our psychological life together in many ways, allowing us to encounter others, ensure our needs are met, and maintain healthy relationships. Joseph Castone, a psychoanalyst in the United States, speaks about aspects of personal agency. One aspect is the ability to maintain adequate self-observation, and another is the ability to stop and change course. As we discern something, we grow more objective about the world around us, understanding how our relationships, experiences, hopes, and disappointments come into play to impact how we make a decision. As religious, we are well trained in discernment. Sometimes I don't even realize I'm discerning. Adequate self-observation means we grow in insight about ourselves and grow more aware of our blind spots. The Johari window is helpful here. This might be a new model for you, or you might have seen it in the past. What this model provides is a framework to understand how we relate to the world and to ourselves. Those things that we are aware of about ourselves and others are able to see them, as well as, well, let me go back. I just want to make sure I state this correctly. So the upper left quadrant, it's the open quadrant. That is where people can see us and we understand ourselves. So the aspects about ourselves. This could be a trait like being dependable or being funny. You know you have this quality and others do as well. There's also areas that we know about ourselves, yet we do not readily share with others. This may be those areas of our life that are invisible to others. It's our private life, and we all have a private life, and that is needed. It could be parts of our history or an aspect of our personality that we don't express as much or we don't really want to show people. The blind spot quadrant, or what's here, it's blind quadrant, is when we are unaware of something about ourselves, yet others can see it. And I personally find this the most difficult, like, well, why is she doing that? And I have no idea why I'm doing it. I don't even see that I'm doing it. And we all have blind spots, things that are suppressed beyond our awareness. The last quadrant speaks to aspects of ourselves that we don't know and others don't know either. So think about yourself as a creative person, and then think about yourself as a person that experiences anger. We all have both of these, and yet for some, anger is hidden from others or is a blind spot. Oh, I'm never angry. I hear that every once in a while. I'm like, oh, I'm surprised. The human condition is that we can be angry. Creativity can be the same. Creativity can be a blind spot. Oh, I'm not creative. And yet others see our own creativity. We just might not be able to see it. We create facades to navigate the world. The point I want to make with the Johari window is that as we understand ourselves, we move more into this open space. So here's a reconfiguration of it. You can see that the open box is much broader and the other aspects are lesser. This gives us more insight. We share ourselves. We share our humanity. We will always have the other quadrants, yet they can be reduced as we grow more aware and comfortable with ourselves. Yet we may find ourselves in very different space, with more hidden and not wanting to show who we are. So here's another configuration. So as part of your reflection for this session, I'll be providing an exercise to explore your Johari window. It's a private exercise. You can do it on your own. This will be beneficial as you look at your own sense of personal agency and ability to be self-reflective. This is critical for personal agency because if we are not available to others and to ourselves and to God, meaning accessing this open quadrant, we will not be able to reflect on our actions, observe how we interact in the world and with the world, or have the freedom to authentically discern. And this brings us to the second area for personal agency, which is the ability to stop and change course. As we discern, we are looking at multiple options and seeking where the Spirit is leading us. We are in a stance of openness to freely discern multiple goods. And because of this, we often change course. As religious, this changing course is often a movement toward a more radical or countercultural way of being in the world. Possessing personal agency provides the strength for us to take a particular course, to risk, and to speak a truth. We might do this in our own congregations, in our ministries, in the church, wherever you find yourself. Having agency does not mean we neglect others around us or negate their needs or opinions. Rather, it is putting ourselves into the circle of influence to share ourselves, to be open and vulnerable, to express those parts of ourselves that need to be seen. Remember, God created us in our uniqueness, and we are uniquely made in the image of God. If who we are is not expressed in our relationships and experiences, then there is a part of God that goes unexpressed in the world. Personal agency is about finding your particular voice in a way that honors your culture and life experiences. Personal agency is an important aspect when moving into conflictual situations. So now we're going to move into the conflict management piece.
Okay.
Every culture deals with conflict differently, and we learn how to work through conflict or how to avoid it from our families and experiences during our upbringing. It goes to the very beginning. It is a combination of culture and family learning that we arrive in adulthood with. And most often, it's inadequate to deal with conflict in our now adult relationships, and especially in community. I'm going to provide you with a model for approaching conflict. You will see that most of the work is with ourselves. Conflict resolution is really about our inner journey. So it's about this open quadrant in the Johari window. It's about what is stirred up in us and then how we respond. Perhaps you can see a thread here with the personal agency. Conflict management or addressing conflict is actually a self-reflective process. And it is critical. And the first step of the process is to become aware with what is happening within ourselves. And this is hard work and it takes time to develop. When I was ministering as a therapist, I would tell clients that the goal is to become aware of something, say a reaction that I might have. And I might notice it, or they might notice it like a few days later. I'm like, why did I do that? Why did I blow up or have that reaction or go silent, you know? And so it's just to notice, oh, there I go again. Why did that person press my buttons? Or why did I go silent? And this is great awareness, even to get to that step. The hope is then to think about it and maybe notice it a bit sooner the next time. Maybe it's a day after instead of a few days after. Then maybe after a few months of experiencing that, you'll notice it by that evening. And then maybe you'll notice it a few hours later, and then right after. And then, this is what we all hope for, when it's actually happening. Because then you are able to make the shift and do something different in present time. The good news is that once you begin to notice it, this is a key skill and it takes a lot of courage. It's okay to go back to the person and say something like, I've been thinking, you know, I noticed something happened to me 3 days after we talked. Just because a conversation is over doesn't mean you can never go back to it. So I'm going to share with you a model that I call practicing peace and giving high fives. As you can see now, the words are there.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to assume anybody knows what those two gestures mean. So the two fingers in a V shape is a gesture, at least in the United States where I come from, is a gesture of offering someone peace. Giving high five is a celebratory gesture or greeting and happens by hitting another person's open palm like high in the air and thus giving a high five. The five, I believe, is for the five fingers on our hands. So I'll start with a quick review of what these mean, and then I'll go into each one, each area. So practicing peace, the index finger, so this little finger here, at least in my culture within the United States, is often to indicate that we are number one.
Mhm.
So this might mean different things in different cultures. I'm fully aware of that. So that's what I'm trying to get across. So this is a reminder to ask what is happening with number one, yourself. Also in the United States, and I believe this may be somewhat universal, is what we call giving someone the middle finger. Now, this is a not so nice gesture, and I don't encourage anybody to use this. However, for our purposes, it is a reminder of deciding how we want to respond. So you have your V here, your index finger and your middle finger. So what's happening for me? How do I want to respond? Then we move to giving someone a high five. So you'll see the V is still there, my part, my response. And then we have the skills. The thumb is the workhorse of our hand, right? It's without the thumb, it's difficult to do many things. So the workhorse in this process are the skills of communication. Okay. And I also want to go back about the whole high five dynamic. We don't give high fives to ourselves. I'm doing it right now, but that's very awkward actually to do. It just doesn't feel right. We do it with others. So now we move into the relationship piece of the process. Okay. So the ring finger. So this is the ring finger here. So again, in other cultures, I know that rings are on different fingers. So the ring finger is the finger we put our most precious connections, like the wedding bands, promise rings, our vow rings. So this ring represents our relationships and the people or persons we are in conflict with. We need to put a lot into these relationships. So this finger represents relationality. And then we have the little finger. This little finger is about attitude. So think about the images of people drinking tea and their little finger is kind of held up and lifted up. Now, I have no idea why people do this, and I'm not judging. I just have always seen this indicated as a bit snobbish, kind of like high society snobbish. So I use it in that jest. So here I'm suggesting it's for attitude. Attitude is vital in conflict resolution. If we don't have the correct attitude, or another word actually could be motivation for entering into the conversation, the outcome will look very different, and it will probably not be beneficial to either party. I think a main observation with what I just provided is that skills are only part of the equation. We need skills, absolutely. However, we can have years of skill development. We can be a good listener. We can give feedback. We can learn to do all those things. And if we don't have the other areas, our skills will do us no good. So it's a fuller picture now that I'm trying to get to with regards to conflict management. So I want to make a few basic points about conflict. So a conflict is more than just a disagreement. Now, what I'm presenting to you can be used for disagreements, but now I'm just really focusing on the conflict piece. So it's more than just a disagreement. It is a situation in which one or both parties perceive a threat, whether or not the threat is real. So there's some fear there, there's some intimidation, there's some difficult feelings, more than just a disagreement that can be healthily talked out. Conflicts continue to fester when ignored. Because conflicts involve perceived threat to our well-being, they stay with us until we face and resolve them. So think about a conflict maybe that you've had with like a historical conflict, someone over time. And over time, you might try to avoid that person, or and then every time you see them, you might kind of get a sense of, oh, what is she doing? Or what is he doing? So that's what happens. It festers. Okay. We respond to conflicts based on our perception of the situation, not necessarily to an objective review of the facts. What is this saying? There's always two sides to every story, and it's so accurate. Our perceptions are influenced by our life experiences, our culture, values, and beliefs, and probably a lot more. Conflicts trigger strong emotions. Man, they just come to the fore, right? And if we aren't comfortable with our emotions or able to manage them in times of stress, we won't be able to resolve the conflict successfully, because we're just going to be all over the place with them. And that's not going to be helpful. Conflicts are an opportunity for growth. When you're able to resolve conflict in relationship, it builds trust. You can feel secure knowing your relationship can survive challenges and disagreements. So it really strengthens the relationship. Okay, so now let's explore practicing peace. What is my part in the conflict, and what is happening with me? Okay, so that's my part. So we're going to look at what's underneath. There's a lot of things underlying the conflict. The issue is generally not the primary reason for the conflict. So we need to do our own reflection about why we are in conflict around a certain issue. Think about a conflict you've had in the last year or so. What's underneath the issue for you? I think a big need is to explore our assumptions about what is happening. And some assumptions are those unspoken beliefs that may not be accurate, and we need to identify them for ourselves and check them out. When I would do in my previous ministry, do couples counseling, they'd come in and they're, they had conflict, and I would immediately go to, what is your assumption of hearing what they're saying? And it would go back and forth, back and forth. We would clear up the assumptions, and it would take us to a completely different place quite quickly. So I saw the fruit of doing that. So I encourage you to really reflect on your assumptions about anything. Another underlying part of an issue is our own unresolved issues from the past, and we may be unaware of how our history is influencing the situation. So go back to the Johari window. Assumptions and unresolved issues can go into those quadrants that are unknown to us or unknown to others. We need to do our personal work to bring things into the open quadrant. We may need to seek out some therapy, work with a therapist or a spiritual director, talk to a trusted friend, really seek out some assistance in getting to the bottom of some of these things. So after we reflected on our part, and this can take hours, it can take days, weeks, or months, hopefully not a whole year, but it's going to take some time. We begin to discern how we want to respond. Prior to this, especially in the case of our reflection taking a while, we need to let those involved in the conflict that we are taking some time to do personal reflection. So they're aware of this. They're not just hanging out there wondering, well, I wonder what she's going to do. And then they can start to have things fester as well. Once we are ready to respond, we make a plan based on what we now know, mainly about ourselves. Part of the plan is to talk with the person or the group with whom you are having a conflict. We reach out to them and ask if they are ready. We might need to wait for them, just like they waited for us. And now, since we've done our personal work around this issue, our response will begin there, being vulnerable. Once the meeting does happen, we'll start from our own reflection, being vulnerable and disclosing what's in our heart. Now we'll move to the other three areas: skills. Okay, so there's my part, my response. We just reviewed those. skills, relationship, and attitude. I'm guessing that in your own life experiences, you've learned some skills for communication. Skills are necessary when addressing conflict and difficult to explore in the time we have today. There's just not enough time. I'm providing a document that shows the basic skills of communication and some specific things to conflict management. And I'll also provide some links to other resources that for deeper exploration that you can use. And this will help you understand and practice the very important skills of addressing conflictual issues and situations. And then on a side note too, I think it's never a bad thing if it's a really big conflict and you're unsure of how it's going to go. Get someone to facilitate. It makes it a safer space. It can be a fellow sister, a sister from a different congregation, which is sometimes helpful, so they're not so involved, or just someone that you know that all the parties trust. So the next part of our preparation is about relationships and our attitude as we prepare to encounter the person or persons that we are having the conflict with. How do I honor the space of the other person? How might they be coming to this conversation? Having empathy for the other person and having humility on our part is critical as we approach these conversations. What is my attitude? Do I want to get my way and have the person see my way? Do I see this as an either-or situation, which usually means it's only my way? Or do I see a way to compromise or collaborate that perhaps in our conversation, a new understanding will emerge? Or am I wanting to avoid conflict at all costs, so I will simply go along with what they want or say? This actually brings us back to further reflection about how we're coming to the conversation. And we may need to do some more work around this. Checking out our agenda, our attitude, and ultimately asking the question if this relationship is meaningful enough to come to the conversation from a place of humility. I'll leave you with a kernel of wisdom that I've learned over the years. If the conversation is not going well, because sometimes we get triggered, emotions are running high, and we have no idea where to go, be tentative and ask questions. And I often practice this before the conversation, so it's easier to access in my mind. I'll go through a few different scenarios and I'll come up with one or two questions or phrases that can help me in any situation. For example, I might say, I'm wondering about what you said and curious about what you meant. Very neutral, Or, I think I'm missing the point. Can you elaborate? Both of these put it back to them, so you can kind of get yourself centered again. And it provides you with a space to pause and collect yourself, collect your own thoughts. It also helps to not be reactive and say something that is not helpful. And again, I learned this kind of the hard way. So I have developed that technique for myself. I cannot stress enough how important it is to come to the conversation having attitude, humility, sincerity, being authentically interested, grateful, and being vulnerable. When you think about it, aren't these the traits of Jesus as he encountered so many people in his ministry? Ultimately, conflict management is about having courageous conversations and doing so in love. That is what Jesus taught us, to incarnate love in this world as he did, or put another way, to be God's expression of love in our world today. I leave you with a quote that speaks to our need to dive into our conflicts and to move toward the messiness of relationships. Incarnation is good news, not because it offers us a way out of the mess of this world, but because it shows us what God's love looks like here and now. So thank you. And it's been a pleasure to journey with you during this time. Blessings on your reflections, and I will keep you in prayer as you continue to grow and who God created you to be for and in this world. Blessings.
Sister Linda, thank you so much. You know, the human side of us is the side that you're talking about in particular today, as well as that spiritual side of us. But you gave us some skills, you gave us some visuals that really help us to be able to take the step back. And I really like the fact that the second one was just turn around and go in a different direction. You said it differently though. I was
Course.
taking notes. Pardon?
Change course.
Change course. Yes. Change course. And I think sometimes that's really hard for us, but we can use that language like you said, well, I'm curious about this. It helps us to change course in a gentle way. You have a very nice, gentle spirit. Thank you for leading us in this presentation.
Wonderful.
That concludes our presentation for today. Take care. Thanks.